I'm I'm going to date myself. I was telling Butch, I think I mentioned last Sunday, Cleveland Browns. You know, that's the Baltimore Ravens now. Yeah, well, there is a Cleveland Browns, but that's not the original. The Baltimore Ravens. They moved and they could not use the name, and for some reason, wouldn't let Houston have the Oilers. Yeah, but they had a wide receiver named Paul Warfield, and that's I'm dating myself again. I don't know how many times he beat the Cowboys in the playoffs. He eventually played went to the Miami Dolphins, and I was so thrilled because they weren't in the same league or in the same conference. But he was one of the greatest, I thought. And I know you ladies are interested in all this, but I think he still holds the record. I think he still holds a record for the most average yards per catch was 20 yards per catch, and that's something. But I know, but what I'm getting to is he was asked one time by why don't you celebrate when you score a touchdown? He said, I don't remember the exact reply, but it was like this: I don't score touchdowns by myself. He said it takes a line to hold the defense off the quarterback. It takes a quarterback to get the ball to me. So why should I celebrate when I didn't do it all by myself? And we see so much of it now, even in junior high and high school now. We we see a dance and all. Used to that would draw a flag, but I remember a teammate of Johnny Manziel saying that the last time he saw him get chewed out by a coach was when he was in junior high. And he scored a touchdown and just threw the ball down and said he when I told him, you go pick that ball up and give it to the referee. He said that's the last time I saw him get chewed out by a coach. But we may think that Paul did it all by himself sometimes, but Paul would have been the first to say it took more than him. And you really think about it, really because of course Paul wrote the majority of the book, the Gospels. He was you might say the center of his ministry, but he had help. He had people with him. We might say that he might say he was the quarterback. He was calling the plays by the leadership of the Holy Spirit. Paul first traveled with Barnabas and John Mark. After their dispute over Mark, he and Barnabas went in different directions. Paul then took Silas with him. In Acts 16:3, Timothy, the son of Eunice and the grandson of Lois, accompanies Paul. And then Acts 16:11, Luke writes in the first person. It says, so putting out to sea from Troas, we ran a straight course to Samothrace. That's as close as I can get there. But even the Lone Ranger had a sidekick. And we talk about the Lone Ranger. Well, he had Tonto with him, his right hand man, and had help. But I'll say one thing about oh, I mean, no, we're still on the Lone Ranger. I'll say one thing about the Lone Ranger. Of course, I watched some of his reruns too. Uh, he got into fights, but he never killed anybody, or never drank. And he always shot the gun out of their hand. He never. Now that was a good shot. Oh yeah, yeah. I've said that's the reason I watch these clean westerns. There's just drinking and fighting and killing. Just yeah, right. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's right. That one bullet. Yeah, right. Yeah. Of course, I always like to see Matt Dillon backhand somebody or pistol whip them. Yeah, come across there like that. But I guess, like you said, we saw him on another show. Him and Kitty never had an affair or whatever. But like I said, we uh, I guess it was innocent entertainment. I think I never tried to. Of course, I wasn't big enough to backhand anybody or hit them. Oh, I know it. I shook his hand one time. He was the star of the stock show in Houston, and we met him coming down some stairs in the hallway. And I stopped and shook his hand. I said I shook his hand. I stuck my nose up to his belt buckle and said hi. But I guess we might ought to go on. But anyway, as we look at today's lessons, like I said, we might say Paul, like I said, he had a team. He had those working with him, but they all had different assignments, you might say, positions that they served. Just as we in the church, we're a team. We play different positions with different assignments, but all with a common goal is that of learning and teaching and growing and proclaiming the gospel. That's the main course, the main subject. That's our goal, so to speak. And we all have different gifts. We have different things. Some of them that we see that are open, and some that we don't, kind of behind the scenes we see. But it's all important. And I think we see the same thing with Paul today. The ones that he had with him that followed him and followed and worked with him, some were behind the scenes. Some were more pronounced. But they all had a common goal with Paul, and that was to proclaim the gospel. So if we go in our lesson text now, someone read Acts 18, 1 through 4.
After these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth, and found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy, with his wife Priscilla, because that Claudius had commanded all Jews to depart from Rome, and came unto them. And because he was the same craft, he abode with them, and wrought for by their occupation they were tent makers. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath, and persuaded the Jews and the Gentiles.
Okay, Linda, if you'd look up Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, we ought to know that. And when we get to it there, you hadn't had a chance to read for a little while, so we'll just... Okay, Corinth was one of the largest and most important cities of Greece. They said in 400 BC, the population of 90,000. And it was the largest city in the first century. And it said the Romans demolished Corinth in 146 BC and built a new city in its place in 44 BC. And later made it the providential capital of Greece. I try to picture this, say back in 400 BC, a population of 90,000, and they destroyed it, that city, and leveled it. I don't know what they mean by destroy, but they built a new city in 44 BC, and later made it the provincial city of Greece. Now, Corinth, it says, was the largest city in the first century. They wanted the land. Yes, it was a real strategic, yeah. It said it was built on a hill, a mountain at about 2,000, well, can you think, above sea level? Yeah, the elevation, about sea. And so it was located near the Isthmus. In other words, Isthmus. That was a narrow strip of land connected two seas. If you look in the map, it's just kind of a little old peninsula down there at the lower part of Greece. And that connects the southern Greece to the northern mainland. Now, Corinth also sat between two prime seaports, between the Aegean and the Ionian seas, now which guaranteed its importance both militarily and commercially. Due to its position, Corinth essentially controlled the east-west trade route between the two ports, as well as traffic on the Isthmus between the northern and southern regions of the country. In other words, they said it's near enough that you could walk from one side, one sea to the other. And so it was real strategically set. Now, the city of Corinth was prominent in the first century. Now, Corinth was the capital of the Roman province Achaia. It was a prosperous city, but also known for its immorality. Because of Corinth's sordid reputation, a new Greek word coined, I'll try to say this, Korinthia, which meant to live immorally like a Corinthian. I mean, that's pretty bad. When they'd say that about copper stove or clean, well, it's getting close. Clean. Yeah. What? Oh, yes. And pray it's getting that way. But Probably one of the reasons of the letters to Corinth by Paul was their unwillingness to divorce the culture around them. Most of the believers could not consistently separate themselves from their old, selfish, immoral, and pagan ways. Aquila and Priscilla, the husband and wife team, were to become Paul's close friends, who even risked their lives for him in Romans 16:3 and 4. Even though the two were Jews, they were probably Roman citizens, since Scripture states Aquila was a native of Pontus. Now, in AD 49 and 50, Emperor Claudius ordered all Jews to leave Rome. Due to this order, the two came to Corinth. And I'm wondering, why did they go to Corinth because it was so corrupt? Maybe they thought, well, maybe they need some help. But, I was wondering about that they went to Corinth, and of course they were Christians. They had come to know the Lord. Come in. But Luke did not explain when or how they became believers, but they apparently were already Christ followers when they met Paul. The two were tent makers. Since this was also Paul's trade, it says that he stayed and worked with them. I really didn't research this like I should, but I believe this is the first time we found out Paul helped finance his ministry as a tent maker. I don't remember any other reference to this, that he was a tent maker, that this is how he financed his ministry. We have people today that have surrendered to preach. We call them as lay preachers. They worked at a secular job or a business. They were probably, some of them had not been licensed or ordained, but they more or less kind of filled in. Most of them, like bivocational. Now, bivocational is probably a little different. They had received training, and most of them received training, but we helped what did I say, supplement their ministry of preaching bivocational. And they had a job or worked outside, but we helped supplement them. And they served more as a pastor than, say, a lay pastor, a lay preacher. Lay preacher usually didn't accept any compensation for their work, but that didn't mean they didn't. But normally they didn't. But the tents in Paul's day were either made of leather or thick goat hair. Now I don't know how well they shed water. I don't know if they had to treat them with oil or what to keep them to shed water. But I don't know about the tents today. But I remember when we camped out with the kids and in a tent, if it started raining, don't touch the tent. Of course, one of them would have to touch it. Right, yes. But it would leak. I don't know what it was. As long as you didn't touch that thing, you touched it, here come the water in. And but I don't know if it was that in Paul's day like that too. If it rained, they said, don't touch it. But it's like I said, nearly every time one of them would have to touch it, and just to find out. But anyway, it was like I said, and we don't know how long Paul worked at this as a tent maker. But I kind of wonder too. Paul was well educated. Paul probably could have found work somewhere else in his teaching and everything, but he chose this. And I don't know if he had learned from Aquila and Priscilla, or if he already knew the art of tent making. We don't know, but he did help finance his ministry by making tents. Now, someone read now verses 5 through 11.
When Silas and Timotheus were come from Macedonia, blood be upon your own head. I am clean from henceforth I will go with you to the Gentiles. And he departed thence and entered into a certain man's house named Justus, one that worshiped God, whose house going forward to the synagogue. And Crispus, the chief ruler of the synagogue, believed on the Lord with all his house, and many of the Corinthians, hearing believed, and were baptized. Then spake the Lord to Paul in the night by a vision. Be not afraid, but speak, and hold thy peace, for I am with thee, and no man shall set on thee, hurt thee, for I have much people in this city.
Paul had been on his own here for a while. He had left Silas and Timothy. And after an uproar by some of the Jews in Thessalonica, Paul was sent to Berea. You know, we talk about Sunday. I like the part about Berea because they checked the scriptures. They read the scriptures and checked them out. But hearing where Paul was these same, here Paul was there, here these same troublemakers, the same Jews came to Berea and causing a stir and agitating the crowd. Immediately the brethren sent Paul out to go as far as the sea. And that was in 1714. Paul then wound up in Athens where he preached concerning the unknown God. Remember that, Lassie? He preached, you know, everywhere. You know, I forgot where I read it. I said Sunday where I read it, where herdsmen would take the sheep through the streets, and the sheep laid down, they put up an altar there. And so, that shows how ridiculous people can be. Like I said, he wound up in Athens. With Paul, he left Athens and went to Corinth, where he joined Silas and Timothy. With Silas and Timothy, Paul would devote more time to preaching. In other words, it says Paul began devoting himself completely to the word. Due to scriptures such as Philippians 4:14 through 16 and 2 Corinthians 11:9, it says many students believe the two men brought funds and donated from other churches to help Paul in his ministry. So whether he continued the tent making, we don't know. But they did bring offerings and funds to help him in his ministry, because it said he was compelled by the Spirit in the New King James. So this is so important that Paul could have just taken off on a whim, doing things on his own and disregarding the Spirit's direction. He said he compelled by the Spirit. Notice he was led by the Spirit to go. This is, I looked at this, this is really a lesson to us. At times, the leadership may not be clear, so we're to wait for his decision and leadership. It was common among the Jews when they entered a city, they went to the synagogue to preach or teach. This was common in practice of Jesus. So Paul, it seems as though everywhere Paul went, he met opposition. Paul would probably could have been maybe like some of us today, man, just throw our hands up, said, I've had it. I'm tired of this opposition. I'm tired of fighting, and I've had it. How many, they say that there's more retired preachers that are not in the pulpit in Texas than there are. I mean, that's sobering, really. There's more preachers that have either quit the ministry or retired the ministry in Texas than what's in the ministry now. Like I said, that's sobering. We don't know the reason. Some of them may be retired. Some of them just left the ministry, got tired. We don't know. And then I've heard several years ago, I don't know whether it's still true, that the town Kingsland on the lake there, on the was LBJ or one of the, not LBJ, either one of the lakes there south of Buchanan. There's more retired preachers living there than any other place in the state. It's a beautiful town, right on the lake and everything. I know my brother when he was living in Johnson City, and he said they never had any trouble getting someone to fill in because there were preachers right there within just a few miles. But anyway, like I said, in a way, it's sad that to think of that there's more preachers that's not preaching the gospel in the pulpit than they are that's in the pulpit. But the Jews adamantly rejected Paul and his message. If that wasn't enough, they went as far as blaspheming Christ through their words and actions. Paul then shook out his garments. Remember, we've seen that before, and Peter once said this was a symbol. And when Christ told his disciples, and if you're not accepted, shake your garments out and leave. What? Dust off your feet. Yes. So Paul then shook out his garment, and this was a symbol showing he did not one speck of the synagogue dust remain on him. This is pretty blatant. Paul then declared, your blood is on your heads. I am innocent. Sure. Yes, 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 it is. And it's, when does it come to that? I guess my question that we get so far, uh, say, well, I'll just, God forbid, I don't think it'll ever happen. If things we get so way out, I call it left field, that we say, some us say, we've had enough, and we shake the dust from the garment and walk out. Oh yes, yeah, and it's not just over trivial things. Yeah, it's that's things I say get over it. Uh, but uh, but I read in Ezekiel 33, God's charge related to the prophet's task as a watchman for God. If he sounded the alarm and people refused to respond, the watchman was innocent and the people's blood was on their own heads. In other words, if they sounded the alarm and they ignored it, and we've probably heard instances or know of instances of that. Military, if the guard sounds the alarm and no one pays the attention to it, he did what he was what his job or he was supposed to do. Paul then left and went to the house of a man named Titus, I guess, Justice. Some they just use justice in some of them. I'll just use justice. But Luke mentioned two facts about Justice. He was a worshiper of God. Justice may have been converted after Paul left the synagogue. We don't know. The second was he lived next door to the synagogue. I think Luke was having a little fun here. I think he said, well, Luke added that he was next door to the synagogue. I believe he put that in there on purpose, having a little fun. Paul got kicked out of the synagogues. He just moved next door. And just kind of like, well, here I am. But Paul left the synagogue because of opposition and blasphemy. So he just, like I said, just moved next door. To make things worse to the Jewish opposition, Crispus, the leader of the synagogue, must have walked next door and became a believer in Christ Jesus. That even made things worse. He just walked next door. I'm going next door. I'm going to the church down the street. That's right. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, I think that's kind of, well, we don't like it here. We're just going to go next door. That reminded me of one. We got time. This this church was on a mission trip, and they had a crash on a deserted island, and all of them were killed except this deacon in the church, and he was a construction. He was in construction, and he was there for years. And finally, the Coast Guard spotted him and landed and to rescue him. And they said, of course, he was grateful. And they said, well, what's this building here? He said, that was my home. That's where I lived. Well, he said, where's this one here? He said, well, that's the church where I go. I said, well, what's that third one? He said, that's where I used to go to church. Doesn't that kind of explain? Kind of sounds like some of us. Yeah. But not only did Crispus accept Christ, but his whole household were baptized. This is to me a reminder when Peter witnessed to Cornelius, and his whole household accepted Christ and were baptized. Luke, I always like to bring out, and I was preaching to the choir, that baptism didn't have anything to do with salvation. That was the first act of obedience, was baptism. But many of the Corinthians who heard Paul preaching believed and were baptized. There may be times in our Christian walk, like I said, we look at Paul and the problems he went through, and there may be times in our Christian walk we may feel we see no results in our work and feel alone. But through God's word and encouragement and prayers from fellow Christians, God is with us. God is with us, and we don't give up. Paul, like I said, he got kicked out of the synagogue there, and charges brought up against him by these Jews. I think they just kind of followed him around, kind of like a dog is just nipping at your heels all the time. But the Spirit may, like I said, I think the Spirit may lead us to the Psalms when we go through these times, or even Job. But I thought about Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, and then if you read that. That's the verse that we can stand on. Like I said, when we go through trials and it feels like that nothing's being accomplished, we got kicked out of the church. We got our things are going contrary to the Scripture, and we feel like maybe sometimes we're alone, but we're not. And but in a vision, the Spirit then spoke to Paul, "Don't be afraid. I am with you." Just as God is, and that hasn't changed. He is with us today. This vision gave Paul the strength to continue his ministry in Corinth, which lasted a year and 6 months. That's pretty long for Paul to stay in one place. It lasted a year and a half. Even though we read, spoke earlier how immoral the city of Corinth was, and it was in the church too, the immorality. But Paul carried on, and sometimes you probably feel like that we're the Lone Ranger, but there's Tonto next to us. Oh yes, right. Yeah, exactly. You're right. Probably realize he's got a lot of work to do, and is why he stayed. So someone reading out verses 18 through 21. If God will. Here in verses 12 through 17, Paul was brought before Gallio, proconsul in Achaia, a Roman who governed the province of Achaia, which included Corinth. They charged Paul, stating he was persuading men to worship God contrary to the law. But just about the time Paul was about to speak in his defense, Gallio spoke to the Jews. If were a matter of wrong or a vicious crime, I would put up with you. But if it's about words and names of your own law, take care of it yourself. And they said, I'm not going to deal with it. He said, I'm not going to get into your trivial matters, and you deal with it. In other words, he was not going to deal with it and drove them away. He said, get out of here. In other words, more or less said, he said, get away from the judgment seat. You're wasting my time. So they had to have someone to take their frustrations out on. Isn't this something? They had to have someone to take their frustrations out on. So they took Sosthenes, the leader of the synagogue, and beat him in front of the judgment seat. That's kind of like maybe there's I've seen this happen when I was in school. Two boys get in a fight, and he can't whip that one, so he picks on this other, and he knows he can beat up. And I've seen that happen. And I think this is, well, they couldn't do anything to Paul, beat him up, so they just took him, drug this one out of the synagogue, and beat him up. And I guess that, it made them feel better. So after Paul stayed a while in Corinth, he sailed to Syria, accompanied by Priscilla and Aquila with him. Now, am I the only one that noticed the reversal of names here? First, it was Aquila and Priscilla. Yeah, you notice that too. Good. Now it's Priscilla and Aquila. Now I watched a sermon this morning on Robert Jeffries on women did not obey your husbands. He said that's misquoted. But the only thing I can find out, I was reading the MacArthur Study Bible. He states that Priscilla's name is listed 4 times in Scripture, which could imply she had a higher social rank than Aquila. Now I can't imagine that. Or she was the more prominent of the two in the church. Yeah. It's well, I better not go there. Yeah. I better not dwell off in that. Yeah. Yeah, I'm outnumbered. Yeah. But but we don't know why Luke reversed the names. Uh, and that's kind of like we talked about. It's all speculations, and that's one of them non-essentials. Uh, so, ladies, you can use that if you want to. That the woman was more important there than the man, and they came first. But Luke does not explain, like I said, why they left with Paul. But they must have believed that there would be more useful work why they left Paul. But they must have believed that there was more useful work for the kingdom in Corinth. One reason I believe is that they became good. Well, they left with Paul. Yeah. One reason I believe is that they became good friends with Paul. But more importantly, they were led by the Spirit to accompany Paul. I think that's the more important. They were friends, they become friends, but they were led by the Spirit to accompany him. Now, they probably took their tent making endeavor with them in order to support themselves. Now, whether Paul continued to make tents, we don't know. But when they arrived at Caesarea, Paul had his hair cut, but he was keeping the vow. Luke does not indicate what vow Paul had taken, but it is assumed he had taken the Nazirite vow. A Nazirite vow consisted of not touching a dead body, not consuming strong drink, not even eat grapes that the wine was made from, nor cutting your hair. Now, the Nazirite vow was taken by individuals who had voluntarily dedicated themselves to God. I guess we have some today that said, why aren't you? Well, I'm taking the Nazirite vow. That's why I hadn't cut my hair. Yeah. But the vow, like I said, was a decision, action, and a desire on the part of the people whose desire is to yield themselves to God completely. Now, the vow was for a specific time frame. We go back to the Old Testament when Moses and the laws. It may have been for a month or a year or something that they took this vow, and then after this vow that they were free to go back to their normal way of life. But there are only two individuals we know of in the Old Testament and one in the New Testament that were set apart by birth till death, the Nazirite vow, which included Samuel and Samson and John the Baptist. I've often tried to picture them, what they looked like. and we see, of course, Samson broke his vow because we know the story there, how he broke his vow and Delilah enticed him into the. Yes, we will, yeah. But John the Baptist, he ate locusts. He probably wasn't a pretty sight. I'm wondering one time what we would think if he walked into church now, And I don't think so. Yeah, right. They didn't have the men's deodorant either. But it was a simple. Like I said, they were supposed to be totally dedicated to the Lord. Now Samson had his problems, and but we read about you need to go back in Samuel and read about Samson. There's a lot he did for the Lord, a lot, and go ahead and read about it. I mean, we just read about the bad part, but anyway, he took the vow, and like I said, and we know the story. In Samuel, we've studied Samuel in our Bible study now on Wednesday night, and then of course John the Baptist. But Paul then traveled to Ephesus. The city was full of ornate temples of pagan gods. Seemed like everywhere he went, there was worshipers of idols and gods. The Temple of Diana was considered one of the ancient world's 7 wonders. Though it was not a priority for Paul on this journey, he did visit the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews about Jesus. I'm thinking, Paul couldn't let it alone. When he left the synagogue there, he said, I'm going to left the synagogue and go to the Gentiles. Well, he just, he had it in his heart. These are my people. These are my ones that I need to keep presenting the gospel to them. So he went to the synagogues and reasoned or preached to the Jews about Jesus. Paul's plans did not include a lengthy stay in Ephesus. He was in a hurry to get back to Caesarea and eventually Jerusalem. This was the culmination of his second missionary journey. We don't know the reason why he was in a hurry to get back, but evidently he had a good reception in Ephesus because he was asked to stay longer. Oh, that was a change, wasn't it? Paul, would you stay longer? With the word, we want to hear more of the words. Please stay longer. But Paul declined. Probably he thought things are doing okay here. I need to go on. But probably believing God had other things for him to do. And probably, things that, the church is doing well here. And there's those that are working and it's growing. So I've got other things to do. Everything's doing okay here. So he did tell them, I will return again to you if God will. Sometimes I think we use that in the wrong way. If God's willing, I'll do that. Sometimes I think that's we're giving ourselves an out and say, well, God didn't want me to do that. God didn't will for me to do that. So I think we may need to be careful sometimes when we say, if it's God's will.
I'm going to do that. Well, then I remember, it's in God's will.
Yeah, that's right.
You might have great plans.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yes, and it is, and yes, Molly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it is, like I said, we need to be truly sincere and know that it is God's will, instead of, like I said, just giving ourselves an out and say, "Will you help in VBS?" Well, if it's God's will. And I've heard someone say, and I think there's a lot of truth to it a lot of times, when we're asked to do something, we know then whether we are or not. But it's God's will. That's right. Now, I'm not saying always, and we do still need to pray about it. It's God's will. Right, in the creek, yeah, yeah. God's willing, and the creek don't rise. Yeah, yeah. We've said that. Yes, yeah. That's so true. Yeah. No, I wish the creeks would rise. Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, I know we had one Sunday here. We had, I think we may have got a tenth of rain, and our attendance was a little low. I said, I guess all the low water crossings were full, and they couldn't get by, couldn't get across them because of that tenth of rain. Yeah. But anyway, he said, I'll return if God's will. Like I said, I think we need to be careful when we say that, if it's God's will. So then he departed, leaving Priscilla and Aquila. Priscilla's name went first again. So any comments? We got a few minutes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Right.
Mm-hmm. All of his prophetic he gave us.
Sure. Well, he is here today, and right here. Paul is here, and
Thinking about what was going on back then.
yes, sure. Going on. Nothing new. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Sure. Yeah, he didn't. Well, he didn't give it on Corinthians. Uh, sure. And it's sadly, some of it's in the church. And yeah, as it was in Corinth. Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we haven't, and the words slipped me, but we overlook some of the sins of people in the church. Uh, People living together out of wedlock in their work in the church. Things such as that. Uh, some living, like I said, a life that's not maybe not so immoral, but a life that's not pleasing, and we allow it to happen. Yeah, right. Hmm. Yeah, sure. Yeah, exactly. That's right. Oh yeah, I saw it uh, when I was in Brownwood, and of course Howard Payne, and we had several ministerial students in our church. I really question whether some of them were actually ministerial students, if they were really God called. I mean, that's between them and the Lord, but it makes you wonder and question whether. Mm, yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I think the story was when we went to Glorietta one year, and there was a preacher preaching one of the classes said that he was telling it a true story. He said he had a Sunday school teacher teaching junior high boys, and he said he loved it, and the kids loved him. But he said his wife wouldn't come to church, and he said that he got word one time or something that this preacher he drank a beer or two when he came from work, and he said I went and talked to him and told him, asked him, if you drink? He said yes. He said, I'm going to have to ask you either give up the drinking or give up your class. And he said, I'll give up my drinking. He said the next Sunday his wife was in church. He said he asked her, why have you not come to church? She said, I couldn't come to a church that, that allowed or a man to teach a class and that drank. But anyway, we better close. Ken's showing me his watch. Butch, would you dismiss us, please?